I'm really lucky this morning to be able to read from the Gospel of Mark. I think it's my favorite of all the Gospels, mainly because for me, Mark's Jesus is more human to me than divine, and I really like that. And there are so many critical parts to this reading this morning. It's amazing how Mark can compress these ideas so closely together. And then this reading comes from Mark chapter 8, verses 31 to 38. There's a couple things here that really strikes me. Oh my gosh. One of them is that by criticizing Peter, Jesus is showing the importance of keeping, at least to me, of not taking such a narrow viewpoint of things, when in fact the divine viewpoint is right in front of us. The other thing that's so evident to me is that I need to be able to see the Spirit and sense the Spirit by losing myself in meditation and prayer in order to see that Spirit and then to use it. So this morning, again, the reading is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. And Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. But Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's." And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel's sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes into the glory of his Father with the holy angels." This is the wisdom of God.
Has anybody out there seen the movie Schultz Gets the Blues? If you have, just, raise, it was one of those, 2003, it's one of those movies that reminded me of what movies can be. It's about a man, it's a German movie about a man who is laid off, hears the blues and goes to Louisiana. Schultz and his 3 co-workers are forced to retire from the salt mine where they have worked their whole lives, and as a gift at their retirement, they get a big chunk of salt. Wonderful. Schultz is a widower, he lives alone, and the people who made the movie did a technique that I like very much that the director Ono in Japan used to do. Is they shot the room and stayed by looking at the room and watched Schultz come in and out of the room. Wonderful. And one time when he came in and out, he came in the room, turned on the radio, and he heard the blues. And it touched his soul. He plays the accordion, and he went and got his accordion and played the very stanza that he had just heard. He'd never heard anything like it in his life. He decided that at the annual music festival, he would play the blues instead of the standard polkas that his father and his father and his father before him had always played. His friends thought it was good, but the general community was not taken too much. The blues touched his soul. Technically, it was a kind of blues that is called Zydeco. Now another. Anybody heard of Zydeco? Yeah, very good. It is a music born from the Cajun in Louisiana and often uses the accordion, which is what Schulze played. I have a book entitled God, Creation, and All That Jazz by Ann Peterson, and she says that classical music evolved in a time when spirituality sought order out of chaos. She writes, classical music mirrors the theological world of classical theism. God resembles the conductor. The musician's role is to sublimate his or her own creativity and blend in with the ensemble. The music is laid out ahead of time, and the score is a blueprint. The spirituality of that time was looking for God's blueprint. Classical music and classical theism are also connected to reductionistic science. While jazz and blues fit the more relative postmodern world of quantum physics, deconstructionist philosophy, and a more abstruse, chaotic view of the world. There's no blueprint. Life just doesn't come to us as a blueprint. How many of you had pandemic on the blueprint of your life? We do not need recitation. We need improvisation to deal with what we're living in today. When I was in Anacortes, we had two pianists there. One was the hired pianist who played with the hymns, and she would say, I just play what's written. The other pianist wasn't actually a piano teacher. He was an improvisational piano player, and he would come for special music and ask what key. And if anybody said C, he'd get mad. After he got the key, he just took off. According to Peterson, types of music speak to different life situations, both culturally and personally. With this in mind, I would say that all music has potential to be sacred music. I have a little bit of problem with that with rap, but I am aware that rap comes from a specific life situation, predominantly urban and Black and angry. And for that reason alone, we ought to listen. Considering then that much of Scripture is music, especially the Psalms, we could ask, are there certain types of music that accommodate particular scriptures in terms of both content and genre? Psalm 100, what I think a lot of you know, is definitely a praise song. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his hands with singing. Then you look at 137. This is clearly meant to be the blues. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion. Or woke up this morning, still in Babylon. Lord, I'm shedding my tears. I just can't go on like that. See the blues? So the passage that Tom read today to me ought to be sung as a blues song, like this. Jesus must face suffering, be rejected and oppressed, killed on the cross and left for dead. And then the refrain, if you save your life, you gotta lose it all. There ain't no shortcuts. You're not going to the mall. Next verse, if you want to know the great I am, you must deny yourself and take your cross and go on. Next verse. Peter just didn't get it. He wanted worldly fame. He didn't want the cross, but he got it just the same. Refrain. If you save your life, you gotta lose it all. There ain't no shortcuts. You're not going to the mall. Next verse. What are you gonna do with all that stuff if you don't have your very life? It'll never be enough. One final verse. You say, please. But that's not the end of the story. There's still a little more. After 3 days of silence, Jesus lived once more. If you save your life, you must lose it all. You ain't got any shortcuts. You're not going to the mall. Anybody want to play a blues song? It's not a happy voice. It's not a happy voice. It's sorrowful and it's sad. At the same time, it's not apathetic. It's not indifferent, and it's not defeatist. It's a voice that faces reality in its fullness, including suffering and pain, and it says, we must live anyway. We must continue anyway. The blues has roots in the African American experience and its cousin, the Negro spirituals. Some of them are in our hymnal. You might recognize, were you there when they crucified my Lord? Or how about, go down Moses, you know that one? Or I want Jesus just to walk with me, the spirituals. The blues are born out of trouble and an intimate understanding of death and suffering. And we can hear the legacy when we hear the blues. Get out of that trouble, knowing the depth of suffering. There is no sense of abnegation or giving up or being defeated. I have a book from my father. Actually, it's a signed copy of Howard Thurman's The Negro Spiritual Speaks to Life and Death. Howard Thurman. And he writes, death was a fact, inescapable, persistent. For the slave, it was extremely compelling because of the cheapness with which his life was regarded. Then he says also, what are these songs trying to say? They express the profound conviction that God was not done with them, that God was not done with life. The consciousness that God was not exhausted his resources, or better still, that the vicissitudes of life could not exhaust God's resources and did not ever leave them. The blues is about giving meaning to the suffering and the chaos of life and expecting a holy consummation. I believe just about everybody knows the hymn, Precious Lord. Everybody know Precious Lord? Written by Tommy Dorsey, who happened to spend time with blues artists. He wrote the hymn when he was on the road. He wrote it at one sitting. It was immediately after he got word that both his wife and child had died in childbirth. That's the blues. Then there's the story of Martin Luther King, who felt that Precious Lord was his favorite hymn. And while he was walking in the streets of Memphis, not too long before he died, he yelled out, "That's it! That's the song we need to hear." The blues is about sadness and the willingness to live anyway, about sorrow and taking the next step, about suffering and the willingness to hope anyway, in spite of rather than because of. You can't sing the blues if you break your leg while you're skiing. You can sing the blues if you break your leg in the bathtub. You can't sing the blues driving a BMW, but you sure can if you drive that old cop car that they rode around in the Blues Brothers. Don't sing the blues and eat filet mignon. Get yourself some jambalaya. You can sing the blues if you're drinking black coffee, particularly if you put a little whiskey in it. You cannot sing the blues at Starbucks. I never want to hear the blues at the mall. Never. Converse of blues is escapism, callous indifference, and syrupy blind sentiment, where they tell you, don't worry, be happy. And the other one, my favorite of all, just get over it. My sense of people who say, just get over it, have not experienced it yet. Lent is clearly the season for the blues, even in normal times. All the more this year, after prolonged Lent that we've been going through. Lent and the blues go together like mint julep on a hot day. The pandemic has compelled us to face ourselves, which is the purpose of Lent, to redisclose to ourselves our absolute dependence on God. We are promoted to consider our whole selves, including disabilities, foibles, troubles, fears, pain, weakness, all of it, to acknowledge our vulnerabilities and to sit on the edge of life, to sit on the edge of life. Because it's often on that edge of life, feeling the haunt of death, that wisdom comes. There is wisdom in depression. I feel like depression is the meme of our mood and our times as we are closed and isolated. I hear too many stories about people these days who suffer depression. We need the blues because the blues accepts it all. The pain of depression, the loneliness of isolation, the uncertainty in the future, and blues understands that there is wisdom in disability. The blues allows us to listen to our pain and live anyway. There's no blueprint in life. No one path that we have to follow and then we get it right. In life, there are paths, turns, eddies, breaks, falls, often unforeseen and unpredicted. Recitation is of little use. We need improvisation. In the cross, God has shown us a way to enter into our pain and suffering and find meaning in it, to see the wisdom of it, and to know in the depth of our hearts that God will lead us home. When the darkness appears, the night draws near, and the day is past and gone. At the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. At the end of Schulze Gets the Blues, Schulze dies in Louisiana. The last scene is at the cemetery. The priest is in a monotone reading the words of hope. Then one of his friends from Germany, cell phone rings. It actually plays the blues. At first, the friend looks embarrassed. Then his eyes start to gleam, and he pretends that the phone is Schulze. Schulze? And he knew that Schulze was home. Recently in the morning, I wake up to myself and say, I really don't want to wake up to this life anymore. In which case, it's time to sing the blues. Woke up this morning, pandemic raging on, can't go anywhere today. Lord, you just have to send me home. Oh, and the refrain for this one is COVID-19. Lord, all we do, it seems like we're wasting our bloody time. Second verse, people losing life, others losing jobs, the rich get richer, and my child cries in my arms. Final verse, beer in the fridge, bourbon in the drawer. Take me to Cancun, I can't take it anymore. Amen.